I just recently watched an interview, um, Joe Rogan interviewing Jordan Peterson. Um, of course, the controversy around Professor Peterson has been going on for a few years now. Um, I'm a University of Toronto graduate. I spent my career teaching at another Toronto university, York University. I don't know Jordan personally. He's in psychology. I was in sociology, social and political thought at York. I think I once was in a green room with Jordan before a TV Ontario event. I haven't followed the controversy closely. What I've read and heard about it, I have a certain sympathy for Jordan's take on matters. I mean, a law that attempts to enforce changes in speech, a whole series of new bizarre sounding words that we are supposedly being required to employ. All of this pushed by social justice warriors of a particularly ideological sort. His refusal to go along with this, I think, is admirable. I guess I had retired from teaching before that really became an issue. Perhaps I would have also refused if I was being pressed by the university administration to employ this language. I think I would have refused. So I sympathize with that project. There are other elements of his thinking that I also resonate with. He is a passionate anti-authoritarian. He is against the authoritarianism and the tyranny of both the right and the left, as am I. He seems to have a little more to say, perhaps, about Stalinism, but he's also critical of Nazism. Okay. I too was moved by reading Solzhenitsyn's account of the Gulag archipelago. I, of course, as a young man, had identified with Leon Trotsky, and of course many of the people, by no means all, but many of the people who spent time in the Gulag and died in the Gulag were Trotskyists. There's a big difference between Jordan and I. I certainly am a man of the left. But certainly as a graduate student at the University of Toronto, I quickly soured with the authoritarianism of the Trotskyist movement, their manipulativeness, their anti-democratic stance. I mean, the U of T Committee to End the Vietnam War would be holding a meeting or a rally, but the Trotskyists would be caucusing hours before, planning how to hijack the meeting, how to manipulate the meeting, and this turned me off. I moved to a kind of left libertarianism, a kind of anarchism. I think it was way back then that I first began to read Noam Chomsky, and I've been very much in sympathy with Chomsky's outlook ever since. So if I'm a communist, if I'm a socialist, I'm a democratic socialist. I think I'm considerably to the left of Bernie Sanders, but I do believe in democracy, and I do believe in minority rights, and I do believe that when McMaster University invites Jordan Peterson to speak, and then social justice warriors try to shout him down, I think this is appalling. I think the university is a place where where free speech needs to be consistently defended, even when it is extremely offensive to our sensibilities. Nevertheless, the principle of free speech needs to be defended. And so I'm with Jordan on all of these elements. The trouble I have with him, and I confess to not to have made a great study of his works or listened to many of his videos, but I have heard and listened and seen a few events in which he spoke, and what really bothers me is the kind of simplistic thinking he falls into at times. I mean, he tries to be a man of reason, but he seems to frequently not succeed very well at being a man of reason. He becomes unreasonable, and his attitude is not becoming of a scholar, of a university professor who, in my mind, is obliged to try to avoid being simplistic, who is obliged to oppose reductionism, and yet he speaks repeatedly about something that he calls cultural Marxism. Whatever the hell that is supposed to be, he never really defines it. Who are the theorists who advance it, who defend it? He seems to have a peculiarly limited understanding of Marxism, although he throws this term around as if it's a great as if it's an epidemic, a kind of virus that has spread throughout universities in the West, this cultural Marxism. But what is he talking about? I mean, if what he means by this term is this fanatical, authoritarian, tyrannical, social justice warrior type of discourse, well, then that is a virus. But it's a betrayal of the true spirit of the left, and it's a betrayal of much of the spirit of Marxism. He seems to identify Marxism with the demand for equality of outcomes. I don't know what that has to do with Marxism. Marx understood the inevitability of inequality. He simply wanted to design a society that would reduce the excesses of inequality, but one of his famous statements is, "From each according to his ability, and to each according to his needs." Now that statement in itself recognizes that people differ from one another vastly in terms of both their ability and in terms of their needs. People have unequal abilities, and they have unequal needs. So it's not as if Marx is seeking to eradicate difference. Not that there haven't been movements and leaders and writers who perhaps falsely cloaking themselves in the garb of Marxism have sought to eradicate differences, and that's horrendous. That's completely out of touch with the spirit of liberty and respect for the individual person. Now here again, I'm sympathetic with Jordan because he brings Christianity onto the scene, and I identify as with the Christian tradition, and as someone who strives to adhere to a Christian ethic, and therefore believes that salvation has to do with the individual. Someone who, against socialist ideas, I tend to go along with the Christian idea that in order to build a good society, we have to, first of all, help individuals become good. Much sociological and socialist thinking would see it the other way around. Only a good society can create good people. I tend to sympathize with the Christian view that only good people are going to create a good society. So in this emphasis on the importance of the individual and on the importance of the individual seeking his or her, oh, there I go again, his, her, his or her own path to salvation, I'm entirely in sympathy with that. But the reductionist way with which Jordan bandies around this term cultural Marxism, really, as a scholar, he has to do better than that. Marx celebrated creativity on the part of the individual. After the revolution, he says, I will be able to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and criticize after dinner. And he was not meaning that everybody has to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and criticize after dinner. He's talking about liberating the unique creative capabilities of people. Of course, there have been so-called Marxists who do not share these goals. Jordan seems to have confused Marxism with some kind of radically social constructionist ideology like that of Foucault, perhaps, which is, again, completely out of sync with Karl Marx, who believed in the existence of a universal human nature. I mean, he says we have to distinguish between human nature in general and human nature as it appears under particular social and historical and economic circumstances. But there is a universal human nature, but it expresses itself differently under different social arrangements. The great existential neo-Marxist Erich Fromm builds on this, arguing that Marx's very concept of a universal human nature lets us begin to define universal human needs, and once we have those, we're able to, we have a basis for criticism of all existing societies in terms of how well or how poorly those societies satisfy the needs of a universal human nature. And Fromm sets out to do that. He talks about the universal need for meaning, a frame of orientation and devotion. And he lays out a whole series of other needs that societies can meet well or poorly. So Erich Fromm was not a radical social constructionist, and yet in important ways he legitimately calls himself Marxist. He's working in the Marxist tradition. I don't know whether Jordan knows it or not, but much of the most recent writing on Marxism sees it as coming out of the Jewish prophetic tradition. Those prophets, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, who came down from the hills and scolded Israel for falling away from its covenant with God. This is a passionate moral critique of the society based on passionately held universal moral values. And Marxism is a form of secular messianism. This is widely recognized now. Does Jordan know this when he bandies the term Marxism around in the uncritical way that he does? So that's basically my problem with Jordan Peterson. He's a critic of tyrannical ideologists, but he's a bit of an ideologist himself. He shares their reductionism and their oversimplification. He falls into the disease that he is trying to fight, and that's problematic.